I refuse to pay closing costs for the buyer. If you have said that, or you are feeling that way as you're thinking about selling, I get it. It feels like the buyer costs are the buyer problem. Why should you pay any of it? You're already paying commission and you're already moving. Why should you take another hit at the closing table? I'm here today to gently change your mind, because I have watched this exact mindset cost good sellers tens of thousands of dollars, and today I'm going to show you why, with real stories from this year, so stick with me. First, quick definition. Closing costs are the fees that buyers pay at the closing to actually fund and finalize the loan. We're talking what the lender charges, title insurance, appraisal fees, escrow setup, prepaid taxes and insurance, and recording fees. It's like a whole list. Typically 2 to 5% of the purchase price. Here in Gillette, we see normally around 3%. On a $300,000 home, that is roughly $6,000 to $15,000 that the buyer needs to bring to closing on top of their down payment. So if you remember in our past videos about what a buyer needs to bring for a down payment on those different loan types, that can be super hefty to have to include closing costs. So when we talk about a buyer asking a seller for paid closing costs concessions, we're talking about the buyer asking the seller to credit some of these fees back at closing. Essentially, you reduce your net by a few $1,000s to help the buyer get to the finish line. Why do buyers ask for this? Because most buyers, especially first-time buyers, have stretched every dollar to get to the table. They have their down payment saved, they have their moving expenses, and they have inspection fees. They have 1,000 other items pulling at the bank account. And on top of it, they need another $6,000, $10,000, $15,000 for closing costs. So they ask the seller to help, sometimes $1,000, sometimes $5,000, sometimes more. It is, in my experience, completely customary at almost every price point in our local market right now. And this is the part that surprises sellers. It is not a sign of a weak buyer. It is a sign of a normal buyer. Here's what I see happen week after week with sellers who lock into the I refuse to pay closing costs. The first offer comes in, strong buyer, good price, asks for $3,000 in closing costs. The seller says no. Buyer walks or counters and the deal does not come together. The home stays on the market. Second offer comes in a couple weeks later. Different buyer asking for closing costs too, because that is the market. Seller says no again. Arms crossed about it. That deal does not come together either. Third offer, same story. By now the home has been on the market for 6, 8, 10 weeks. The listing is getting stale and showings are slowing. Buyers start to wonder what is wrong with that house. And here is the cruel irony. By the time the seller finally accepts that, yes, this is what the market is doing and they agree to pay the closing costs, they end up paying about the same closing cost amount they refused to before. But now they have also dropped the price 2 or 3 times. They have lost weeks of time. They paid more in carrying the costs, mortgage, taxes, utilities, and the final sale price is lower than the first offer that they turned down. So in almost every case, I have seen this play out. The very first offer was the best offer. If the seller had taken it at the original price with the closing cost concession, they would have netted more, sold faster, and saved themselves an enormous amount of stress. Let me tell you about a seller from earlier this year. I've actually had a few of them. Super nice guy, smart, adamant about not paying closing costs. The first offer that came in was strong at our list price with about half of the seller paid closing costs requested, and he said no. Now, knowing his personality, I had to find a way to reframe it for him. So I asked him if the buyer had asked for a couple $1,000s in a carpet credit or an allowance for landscaping, would you have agreed to that? And he was like, oh yeah, for sure. That's totally reasonable. And I said, it is the same money. The buyer does not care if you call it a carpet credit or a closing cost concession or a price reduction. What they care about is the bottom line at the closing table. So instead of treating it like an attack, let's treat it like a credit that they're asking for to make the deal work. That reframe got us to the closing table, and he was relieved. He said later after closing, I'm glad we figured that out. I almost let that one walk. Here's the strategic truth that I want every seller to internalize. There's no real difference to your bottom line between agreeing to paying $3,000 in closing costs versus dropping your price by $3,000. The math is identical. But to the buyer, the difference is enormous because closing costs mean they can actually get to that closing table. They do not run out of cash, and a price reduction does not help them with their cash crunch on closing day. So when you say yes to closing costs, you are not losing money, you're using the same dollars more strategically to remove the actual barrier to closing the deal. It is not a concession, it's a deal mechanic. When you say no, you're essentially saying, I would rather drop the price 3 times and lose 10 weeks than help this buyer cross the finish line for the same dollars. That way, the answer becomes really obvious. Now, does this come up at every price point? Actually, yes, but it shows up differently. At entry-level price points under $300,000, where most first-time buyers live, closing cost help is almost always part of the conversation. At higher price points, 500 plus, it still comes up, but it's usually a smaller percentage of the deal. Typically, they're gonna be purchasing and rolling over some sort of money from another sale once you get into the higher numbers. Here in Northeastern Wyoming, with our mix of first-time buyers, retirees, military, families, folks moving from out of state, we expect this to come up. The question is not whether it will happen, the question is whether you will be ready for it strategically, or whether you will emotionally react and cost yourself money. Worm. So here's my ask. If you are getting ready to list your home, when we sit down for our pricing meeting and we're going to talk about offer strategy, not just price, but how we will handle any requests like closing costs, etc., how we will handle the inspection, and how we will evaluate offers just as a whole picture instead of just the top line number. Because the goal is not to win the price negotiation. The goal is to net the most money in the shortest time possible with the least amount of stress. Sometimes the best path to that is saying yes to the right concession on the right offer early on. If you are thinking about selling and you want to have a strategic plan, not just a sign in the yard, text me. We will sit down, we will go over your home, your goals, and how you play the game in a way that it nets you the most. Real numbers, real strategy, no sales pitch. This is The Real 411 on Wyoming Real Estate. I'll see you on the next one.